Hello and welcome to Better Business Podcast. My name is Alexei. As always, trying to bring you good and interesting guests that can potentially help you identify new directions in your business or help you improve. Today, I've got Col Neate with us. How you going there, Col?
I am doing very well. Thank you very much. How you
Col,
doing?
yeah, not too bad, mate. Thanks for asking. Col runs a business called Altitude Coaching, but I'm sure there's a bit of a background story that we may find out about today, how Col ended up with that business. So, Col, tell us about Altitude Coaching. Tell us about yourself and how you, got into this business. What's your business journey like?
Look, it's a really interesting question because it's not probably what people see as your traditional way of coming into business. Um, no, I started out life as a motor mechanic, and I love telling people that because it really comes from understanding the grassroots, understanding where probably the majority of staff do begin, majority of people do begin their working career. So it's looking at those grassroots type learning and understanding. From there, I sort of moved more into the management and leadership positions to really get that clearer picture about how to start to motivate staff, how to actually get longevity, how to actually attract and bring in the right people into business. And that has been probably one of the massive learning curves because we don't always get it right.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of trial and error for businesses, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And I think we sort of have that propensity to lean to people that are similar to us, but they don't necessarily bring about all the skills, the mindset, the understanding, what you really need to really build your business.
Mm, mm. And
So, sorry, go for it.
and you've been doing this for about 15 years as a coach. Is that about right?
I have been probably a coach long before I knew it.
Okay.
I went out on my own in the last couple of years, a nice healthy time around beginning of COVID, because I think it was that really good opportunity that, the world changed, as we all know. But what I actually did, if I look back, I had this really clear picture about I wanted staff to actually stay in the business or stay with me because they wanted to, not because they had to or felt obligated. So I was really looking at opportunities for them to focus in on their strengths so they could excel. And then if they were excelling, their business starts to excel.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened for me was I started to see that even though I might have had this expectation on what people can do, it actually started to identify what people were capable of. And what I basically started to look at was working on how can we actually incorporate that with all the stuff that we have to do on a daily basis so that the business can expand, the business can excel. Because one of the things is, especially with a lot of the small businesses, is it grows. But managers, business owners, teams, they don't necessarily grow with it because they're trying to do too many things.
Mm.
So I actually started to take a step back and look at working with people that focuses on their strengths, that they can be the best that they can be,
Yeah.
and start to look at some of those triggers, some of those areas that get in the way of them actually being their most authentic self.
Mm. Yeah, well, look, I definitely can back that up because I find that a lot of business owners they are looking for growth quite naturally. They want to do better in their business. They want to be able to scale what they do, and typically there is a mission behind what each business owner is really looking to accomplish. So I think when it comes to staff and when it comes to teams, oftentimes people are a little bit well, not really in line with that because oftentimes the whole goal isn't really communicated very well, nor does the business owner sometimes actually know how to communicate that. And I find that most people are like cats. They hate changing, right? So if you're going to get a cat from one environment to another, will absolutely hate it for quite a bit of time. And I think employers are just like that as well. They're quite comfortable where they are. If you're going to ask them to do more or ask them to change, you will typically find that it is a bit of a struggle for them, at least initially. Is that your observation as well?
Look, I think there's some great insights in what you mentioned. I think what I also found out, just to tap into what you said and also to add to it, is people are happy to come along for the journey if they know what's ahead of them, if they know that somebody's got their back, if they know they've got that relatively clear picture. Sure, people want, well, not say, I'm not going to generalize saying all people, but most people want to know what's happening. They want to know the saying that's because of what's happening behind the scenes, that they've got some level of comfort, they've got some level of security, they've got some level of I can park because I need to focus on other aspects. One of the things that I really found, especially in my career, is that I had this view that everybody wanted to be in better positions and to be in better roles, to work their way up the corporate ladder. That was an assumption I made because that's what I had. But what I actually found that wasn't the case.
Mm.
Some people want to be the best that they could possibly be in their role. And there was ways to actually look at it on how they could excel in their current position. So they can be the best that they can be right here, right now. The other thing too that I sort of also found is I started to get into a lot of projects and building up businesses, but I had to rely on people, had to rely on other parts of the business or other parts of businesses to get that skill set. Now, they weren't reporting through to me, but I had to actually win the hearts and minds for them to come along for that journey.
Mm.
So whilst you can sort of think, oh yeah, people will just get it and people will come along for the ride, it's not necessarily the case, because it's one of those things that pops up is what's in it for me?
Mm.
I know we've heard that term with them, what's in it for me? But it really is. It's looking at, it's not necessarily around dollars. It's not necessarily around culture. It's not necessarily around workload, but it could also be around responsibility, accountability, and making certain that people excel to the best of their ability.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that. I mean, let's talk about your coaching philosophy and your approach. I mean, you sort of tapped on that, but I guess one of the things that really, caught my attention last time we spoke is really about your understanding of people and them wanting to be connected with their purpose. Because a lot of the time, everyone sort of wants that, but they don't really know how to do this. I mean, tell us about your philosophy and approach, first of all.
Look, thanks for the question. And I think it's a really good one. We're all individuals. And I know there's a lot, I'm not saying anything new, but the thing is there is if we don't actually build up or we actually work with people as individuals, we're missing out on some golden opportunities because they bring so much. And one of the key things there, especially where I come from, is looking at how do we actually get the best out of the individuals. Now, that sounds like most business owners, most managers, most people are looking after teams want out of their staff anyway. So I predominantly work with people that's where managers are looking at how do I grow my business, but I don't know what next steps to take. How do I know that something needs to change. I know that something needs to be different, but I just don't know what it is. And I think also is people set out with the best of intentions with a lot of goals, with a lot of things like, I need to achieve this. The other one too is especially I do a lot of work with working with teams and groups, but it's also I'm not getting what I need to get out of that group, out of that team. But one of the things that really sort of identified or came from that is the fact that we get in the way of ourselves. So we have these expectations, but we put these limitations on ourselves. So one of the things that I actually work with is starting through and actually coming from a place of strength, because we're so good at doing a lot of things, but we chastise ourselves. We build ourselves up. We don't necessarily understand or notice the triggers that get in the way of our success.
Okay. Okay. So when it comes to strength, do you use a profiling, like a personality profiling system of some sort in order to help you with that?
Oh, yeah. Look, I'm accredited in a number of profiling tools. Enneagram, DISC, Hogan assessment, and I like them all because it gives you a great opportunity to actually put it in front of somebody so they can start to get to see themselves how others might see them, or start to get to see themselves through a different lens, or start to get them see themselves and just going, I never even realized that. Because we can use that we don't know what we don't know. But if we start to look at ourselves through a different lens, it's a great opportunity to create that awareness that we can actually start to get that ball rolling where we can make sustainable change.
Mm. Yeah, well, look, I think that's a great point. And if I may ask you just a question, go a little bit deeper on that. I find with a
Sure.
lot of these profiling systems, they're a great way to identify the strength and for people to be aligned with, I guess, the key I guess, well, with a magic, to put it simple, right? So someone's really good at something. They do a little bit of everything, as obviously small business owners, or sometimes, medium-sized business owners. But then from there, if you can actually get them to zoom in onto one thing and really focus on their strength, they get awesome results. What I do find, though, the next step from there is actually really to create flow. And a lot of people really get stuck in their magic sometimes, but really it's the flow that they want. So it sort of feels like, hey, I'm really good at this, but then I'm really struggling because I am still lacking either team members or understanding where else I need help in order to achieve that flow. I mean, what do you think about that as a perspective?
Look, one of the things that I've really identified or to work with people is it's actually being present
Mm-hmm.
with the individuals, because with what people, when you start to talk with them, when you start to build up that ability to allow people to open up, it's got to come from a place of trust. So people, when they generally start, looking at their profiles, they want to see that particular aspect to say, yeah, this is what I'm really good at. One of the things that I really love to use is giving people an opportunity to sort of say, before we actually have our first one-on-one, have a look through the assessment, have a look through it and see what comes up for them. Because what might come up from then might be totally different than the way that I see it.
Mm.
And it's not so much about me actually looking and saying, right, Alexei, you need to work on this, this, and this. Tell me a little bit more. And it's not just that, as you say, that superficial stuff. It's actually starting to get into a little more in depth about what actually comes up, what actually identifies. Because when people start to see or starts to identify that what is coming up below the surface, that's when they can actually start to see what is some of those rationale about what is holding them back. Because it's not so much looking initially at saying, why are you stopping yourself from doing that? But it's more looking at saying what's coming up for you at that particular point.
Mm.
What do you notice within yourself? Is it something along those lines about something that sort of pops up for me now? Is it procrastination is the term that keeps coming up. Procrastinate, I do things that are easy. But what we really find is those sorts of things really are there to protect us. But it's when our protection mechanisms start to get in the way of our awareness and our growth and actually being sustainable and getting that longevity.
Yeah, I do find that people mainly procrastinate on things that actually create the biggest change, and oftentimes it's almost like, well, You know, everything's crystal clear. You need to do this, but people are really struggling to invest the time, or maybe they're fundamentally afraid of change. But yeah, okay, I can certainly relate to that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you say that, is because if people are not ready at that particular point in time to make that change, they know fundamentally that, yes, I know for me to get to the next level, this is what I need to do. But if they're not ready for it,
Hmm.
that's a big challenge.
Yeah.
And as human beings, we don't like being told what to do, even though it rationally makes sense. We need to work it out for ourselves.
Yeah, well, it's that I guess ready, aim, shoot concept that we are taught from early childhood, which doesn't necessarily get the outcome in time, oftentimes, because I think most people, and especially business owners, don't really understand the whole timing aspect over a lot of decisions. And I think the more successful ones are really good at that, because if you're able to change that and make it, ready, shoot, and then aim, correct something once it's actually triggered. I think it's a lot better to actually get a better outcome, because at the end of the day, it's just about making an effort to create that action, to create that next step. Yeah. Yeah.
No, there is. There's some, but I think, one of the things that really sort of what comes up for me is when people start to get that, I use the term that aha moment, when all of a sudden they really realize the fact that it's saying, I thought it was this particular problem that I was trying to solve, but realistically, it's this.
Yeah.
And as a coach, you may see that there's something else that is deeper than just what you see at the surface.
Okay.
But once people start to really identify it for themselves, then that gives that opportunity to just go, now I can start to see things from a different perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that things are a little bit clearer for our listeners, can you maybe give us an example, like in a practical sense, as to how, your approach and what we just discussed could potentially be applied to a business owner that's struggling with either decisions or clarity, or potentially growth? Because I think maybe not everyone's familiar with personality profiles, purpose, and while I think everyone understands things like procrastination, I think an example would potentially really help here.
Look, yeah, absolutely. And I think we love to hear the stories, because I think as human beings, we relate to that. It's when we talk about the dialogue or the aspect, it's more about how we can actually learn from others. Now, one of the things that really springs to mind is I can think about one particular client who's a well-experienced general manager within a large group. It's got multiple business. This particular individual's got an endless supply of ideas, and he encourages the team almost relentlessly to actually think about it and implement the things that they can actually make a difference. Although he seems to share his thoughts and his ideas, he keeps on spinning his wheels, keeps on getting in the way of himself, because he seems to be doing more and more, or increasingly building his already hectic workload. And a lot of the things that he tries to implement, it's not going through at the speed that he's wanting to get them. So it starts to get frustrated, because all of a sudden now I'm putting out fires continuously. I'm not actually being strategic, which is where my heart and where my mindset is. So one of the things that he really started to do was he's working in the business as opposed to working on. And he started to actually identify and go, oh, wow, it is. Even though he fundamentally knew that, he didn't actually see the link that because that he's just continually working in, he's not actually building where the business, or he sees it where it needs to go. So one of the key areas that we started to talk about was actually building up that awareness that even though he's got a lot of good ideas, the team didn't actually see them, that they were my own. When you're actually part of the journey and you actually see that you're part of the solution, people actually implement what they help, or what they actually own, what they help create.
Mm.
So even though there was great ideas, They didn't get traction because people didn't actually see, yeah, great idea, it's not mine. So he started actually to tap into the strengths of those that were around him to come up with ideas, and for him to actually let go and saying, yep, even though I might have thought of that idea, I'm happy for somebody else to take the kudos, somebody else to take ownership. And what he actually started to see is traction starting to occur where a lot of his ideas and his thoughts and his staff were actually implementing them a lot quicker.
Okay.
And of course, he started to see that retention in the business started to increase because people felt like he cared. He always did, but he just didn't get that message across. Started to see that the bottom line started to increase because he just, all of a sudden, it was just people thinking of things or looking at things through a different lens and looking at more of the holistic approach around the impacts of the decisions that others were making. That's one particular example that I can possibly give you.
Yeah,
And
I
I've
think
got
that's a great one. I think it's a
plethora of them, but that's a really good one where just gone, I've got these ideas, but I just can't get them across the line. And it made him frustrated.
Well, I think it's a common one where business owners sort of fall into working in the business as opposed to on the business. And look, there's obviously a little bit of both that every business owner needs to do. But if you just fall into working in the business, that's where the growth typically stops unless you've got a clear plan that you're executing. And working on the business is something that allows you to identify potential opportunities and threats. Because if you just sort of got your head down and you're working along, it's often very difficult to steer out of economic downturns and market fluctuations that may be affecting things. I also like the whole idea of engaging other team members, because there's probably nothing better than team members feeling like they are in charge of the actual flow and direction, and actually what happens to the company actually aligns with their values too. Because I've seen many different companies do things in many different ways, and look, I can't specifically say what's better in the end, but I can say that some approaches are a little bit more gentle. They sort of involve everybody else. People feel inclusive. And typically those companies have got a better team culture where people are all on the same page and they feel like they're contributing and growing as well. Whereas with other companies, you may see that the senior management is really pushing hard for change and everyone else follows their leads. But then at the end of the day, everyone's really tired and people are not really keen to spend any more time because they're not really connected to the purpose and that change. So I can certainly relate to what you're saying, but I guess it really depends on the size of the company and the changes that they're looking to implement as well.
Look, oh, absolutely. And you touched on a couple of really, really good points around culture, people getting tired. But it's also looking at, you can think that some of the aspects of our roles, some of the aspects of people's jobs, that they do it and it actually energizes them. It actually encourages, just I can do this day in and day out. It really motivates me. So we know that when people are getting tired, it's generally as a result of a whole culmination of certain aspects, certain parts of their role, certain parts of people's interactions, customers, all of these sorts of things. If they feel like they're not necessarily getting that support, it can actually be quite draining. But I think that those that are listening to the podcast are probably thinking, that some of the aspects of the role or the business that really motivate you, you can do it day in and day out. You got to turn up again tomorrow and do that same thing. Why? Because it gives you energy. The culture is probably one of those, it's another word that people throw it around. We've got to have that good work culture. But the point that I heard you saying is, it's not just a matter of just things that we do. It's not just things that we speak about and just go, yeah, this is the culture that we set, but it's actually actions. But it can also mean, even though we've got the best of intentions as a business leader, it's looking at that know when to hold them and know when to fold them. The whole gambler addict, that song, The Gambler, where it's just a saying, let's start to look as businesses grow, how I can actually get more people to actually broaden our horizon so we can get better outcomes.
Cool. Well, when it comes to working, I guess, on the business versus working in the business, would you have any tips or advice for business owners, like specifically small business owners, or maybe people who are just starting out? I mean, is there like a sweet spot ratio, or should you be taking, I don't know, a particular approach to the whole thing? Because I do find a lot of people typically quite naturally transition into business from what they were doing previously by obviously trying to discover a better lifestyle, or freedom of their time, as some people like to look at it. Are there any tips or advice that you could potentially provide on that topic?
Look, there's a couple of things that come up for me. No, and there is a whole heap of reasons why people get into business. And I think as individuals, it's actually keep using that reflective practice to actually go back and look at the reasons and look at the rationale of why we got into business. Because all of a sudden, it's and if our focus starts to deviate and identify things that are not actually going to serve us or serve us in a way that is productive, we can go and chase squirrels. Because all of a sudden, it's just this continual ability to just go, I've got to chase this, I've got to chase this. And to your particular point, where it's just gone, it's tiring. So if we actually take the time out and actually reflect on what is working for us, I think it's one of those really good aspects that it actually regenerates our why. Why are we in business? Why am I in business? The other one too is also to look, is to say, is find somebody that you can actually talk to, especially if you're just generally starting up. And what I mean by that is somebody that you actually trust that can challenge you. I speak to a lot of clients that are quite a small business operators, and they generally talk to their partner, their spouse, to saying, look, this is what's coming up. And what we actually find on numerous occasions is the fact that the spouse has always got nothing but good news for them. They back them up. Absolutely. Why wouldn't you? But it's not necessarily serving the business owner in the best possible way because it doesn't challenge them. The other thing too is also when you're talking to, a trusted consultant or coach or trusted mentor, is actually getting them to challenge them. Otherwise, it's just a lovely conversation.
Absolutely.
But I think it's also too is the more that it's identifying too that you can't necessarily do it all on your own.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I think you've touched on a lot of very good points, and hopefully our listeners are getting, some good ideas out of this. Because at the end of the day, I think it's about clarity. It's about understanding where you can improve, and potentially from there to understand the starting point. I like the whole idea of exploring why. I think a lot of businesses originated to basically start from a problem, or people actually wanting to make more money, have more free time on their hands, or have no boss or something, and then from there, well, the bigger they grow, the bigger the problem gets. And a lot of people don't realize that problem is going to come up eventually. And it's typically about people just getting too involved in what they do, or potentially really struggling to scale because other people aren't connected to their purpose, or there may not be a clear idea behind the business as well. And I see a lot of businesses that really start quickly and grow, and then they come to a point where just things start to fall apart. And look, I don't mean to, pick on, newspapers or the news specifically, but if you look into, any a newspaper any day of the week right about now, you probably hear about a company going under. And it's not obviously the nicest thing, but I am quite confident that besides obviously all the delays in payments and cost of goods and so on, there could be fundamental problems about how those companies are structured and how they potentially have grown over the years, and the philosophy about them as well. There's typically another picture behind the scenes that a lot of people don't specifically address.
Look, and I think you've touched on quite a few good points there. That's it. It is not as clear cut. But generally what I've found is we get in the way of ourselves and we don't, to your point, tackle the real issues. We may think we know the issues, but we don't really know what is the problem that we are trying to solve.
Absolutely.
And generally, if we leave it a little bit too late at the point that you're making, and I think there's been some reasonable size organisations recently, is it's just things that have come up they haven't necessarily attacked or approached in a manner that is going to get them the best outcome.
Yeah,
And then all of
absolutely.
a sudden it's a little too late.
Mm,
And then, yeah,
yeah. Well,
unfortunately, then it's folding up.
yeah, well, look, I think it's a big topic within itself, and obviously, I'm just being mindful of time. But I guess one thing I wanted to touch on is leadership, and I guess there's obviously something going on. I guess I've been observing a lot of issues within the leadership, politically, from a perspective of corporate organizations. We can relate to the recent Optus situation. What's your take on leadership and the future, I guess, of coaching when it comes to working with leaders? I mean, what the hell's going on, mate? I mean, have you got a bit of an idea as to what is happening from that leadership perspective inside the companies or inside the individuals that are driving the companies? Because I guess what I related to just before, big companies going under, if the issue really is cash flow and people haven't really diversified the business and just focused on one area of business, and people haven't paid the I don't know, amounts on time, and other companies were sort of behind on certain things, that created the downfall of the company. To me, I still think that's a leadership issue, based on the fact that the leaders have focused on one thing specifically and failed to sort of understand the threats and other opportunities in the market. I mean, so what's your take on leadership, problems within the leadership, and where is this all going?
Wow, geez, that's a great question. You haven't given me
Probably a
much
big one.
time. But my view on leadership is, and again, this is coming on, I can give it a quick example from my perspective. And I know when I first started out, it'd be great to get into that role of management, and that term management and leadership. And I think my view or my mindset is that you need to know pretty much everything that's going on so you can actually pull, pull the levers, pull the strings, get ideas and thoughts and make a well-informed decision. But one of the things in there is what I started to identify is the fact that by that particular approach, I missed out on so much opportunity from the skills, the strengths, the mindsets of everybody else. The big thing that I see with leaderships, or leadership as that term, is creating that awareness amongst yourself that you don't know everything. And it's looking at that opportunity to bring your team up to a certain point that, if you want to, they make you look good because you're allowing them to perform.
Mm.
And once you start to allow them to perform, they can actually start to identify and start to feel like they can actually they can actually provide opportunity to give you ideas, as opposed to just turning up and going, yep, I just worked for Alexei, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. Then I go home and I'm just tired and I'm going to focus on other things. Or I'm going to leave the business. So it's one of those things here is looking at how do I, as a leader, encourage my staff to be the best that they can be so they can provide those opportunities to bring up a lot of the ideas and a lot of the implementation. Because from my perspective, I thought I had all the ideas. I thought I had all the solutions. Realistically, I didn't.
Mm.
But what I did actually do was ask the questions, and for that leader to be present with the individual and show that you actually care about what's coming back. Not in every instance to say, yes, we're going to implement this. Yes, we're going to implement that, but giving people an opportunity. And I think it's sort of that leading with a coaching mindset is probably the future of leadership, because it's looking at more of a broader spectrum of ideas and thoughts as opposed to that single point sensitivity.
I think that's a really good answer. I think I've come across something very similar back in 2017. In fact, I was invited to a conference by Google. And as a premier partner, we basically had other agencies in there. And what Google has done for us is they actually got a business coach to work with us. for the duration of 3 months to help us implement a little bit of leadership and change. And I can see how that sort of worked now from the perspective of, hey, now it's 2024 and it's been obviously a while, but what you're saying does make sense. And I think companies like Google probably see that a lot early on. Not that it's a specifically new concept, but I think you're right. I think the idea of implementing leadership and coaching together does help business owners and teams to sort of develop and be on the same page and adapt to better environments. So that's a great answer. Thanks, mate.
You're more than welcome.
So if anyone wanted to get in touch with you and I guess engage you for some coaching or basically get a little bit more clarity or help their teams, tell us about your approach. You do a discovery session, or do you do sort of like things like team training, webinars? What's your approach to engaging with individuals?
Look, the way that I approach it is it's individually targeted. Because what ends up happening is that initially there's probably some consistent approaches that I do take, but the first one there is that chemistry session. So where you can actually work and just go, yeah, I think I can actually work with this individual. And they can actually work with me. Because you don't particularly, from my perspective, want to have somebody that just thinks, yeah, I don't, it doesn't really gel. Because if it doesn't gel, it's going to be pointless for both. So that chemistry session is one thing. Once we actually build up, and that's free, obligation free, have a bit of a chat. It can be generally done face to face or over Zoom, over whatever medium that you want. If you can do a face to face, that's great, but Zoom's a perfect opportunity. One of the things that I also suggest is doing at least one of the personality type testing. And there may be sort of that opportunity where we're going, look, I've done DISC before. I really wouldn't mind seeing what that's like. Great. Because what it is a great opportunity to actually work with them, just to give them to look at it through a different lens. And then from that, we actually start to work about what is it that they're trying to solve. And then initially, it's probably from that perspective is generally it's sort of a 4 to 6 month period is we can actually work with the individual on what it is that they need to focus on. Predominantly in the early stages, it's getting them comfortable about what they see as a direct result of their assessment, and then starting to work on how can they actually use that strength. Because if we come from a place of strength, we will get uplift for the things that they're not as strong to work on the challenges that they see in the business. But it's really working with them, not just to say, yep, well, I want to increase my bottom line. Let's see what that looks like. What does that really mean? And start to dig deeper.
Okay.
From there, we sort of can actually, if people want to work with strategy, people want to work with customer experience, we can actually tailor training sessions with teams, with groups, with individuals that can actually explore different opportunities.
Okay, well, that gives me a pretty good idea. Hopefully our listeners can follow that as well. I will put a link to the description of this podcast to your website. So if anyone wants to reach out, you guys can connect with Col as well. Mate, that's awesome. Before we wrap up, I just thought I'd do this session, which I call rapid fire. This is where I ask you for some, pretty specific questions, and I just want a very simple answer. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. What's your favorite personal development book?
My favorite personal development book, the one that sort of springs to mind, Simon Sinek.
Okay.
The ones that he puts together, they just put it in a way that actually resonates with me.
Okay, so start with
why
why leaders eat last.
The individual.
Okay.
It starts to look at us, not
Yeah.
necessarily looking outwards.
Okay, cool. Any books in particular?
It starts with the why.
Okay. Yeah, I've read a couple other books by Simon Sinek. I think Start With Why is probably his best one, but Leaders Eat Last was one of the last books I've read, and that was a good one as well. Okay. Best place where you had a holiday?
It's Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia. Anywhere specific?
Look, Vietnam was fantastic because they've got pretty much a sense of humour like most Aussies, and it's just so picturesque.
Awesome.
I did that quite a few years ago, especially up around Ha Long Bay, which was just amazing.
Okay.
And the food was great too.
I'll have to check it out. I've been to Thailand, I've been to Bali, but I haven't been to Vietnam yet. Um, Now, last question. Your favorite sport?
Favorite sport. Look, I love cycling because realistically, for me, cycling, it's like a game of chess. Sure, you've got to be fit, but it's knowing when to put the power down and knowing when to hold back. And it's also knowing your limitations.
I was recently doing a podcast with Richard Triggs, who's one of the headhunters that specialize in the whole senior leadership space, and he was telling me that cycling is the new golf. Apparently,
Yes.
that's something that really connects quite a lot of people in the senior position. So, if anyone's listening and you guys want to connect with more people in the corporate world, maybe you should get into that lycra and start cycling on Saturday mornings or whenever you guys do all that. Yeah.
Yeah, the lycra may not be the best look, but I'll still wear it.
Absolutely. Well, Cole, thanks, mate, for your time. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, our listeners got a few insights. And I know you've gone quite deep on a lot of different things as well. But I think the best way to go about things is to potentially reach out to Cole if you got any specific questions and take him up on that discovery session, which he offers, and find out where he can help your business. Thanks very much, mate. And yeah, I will connect with you soon, and hopefully our listeners enjoy this episode.
Absolutely. And thanks for your time. Thanks for the questions and all the best.
Well, this was Better Business Podcast. If you guys are enjoying these episodes, please make sure you don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. That really helps us with our algorithms to rank higher and get more people to learn about our podcast. And yeah, if you like to send this to a friend or colleague or someone, that will be awesome as well. My name is Alexei. I'll chat to you soon.